If a group of people are going to live together, then there's going to be some idea of who will do what. Who checks the electricity meter, who buys the milk, who feeds the ducks. And that division of responsibility can be seen when countries are governed. The rights of its citizens, how laws are made, the administration of justice and the governance of that country are all written down in a document known as a constitution.
As we know, the Constitution underpins everything which goes on in the Falklands. People's rights, our laws and everything are based on the Constitution. So we have to have a Constitution which is right and fair to the people, but also it is the way the Falklands is run. So any laws which are made have to be underpinned by the Constitution.
Walter Bagehot, a Victorian journalist who wrote the classic work on the English Constitution, insisted that what was crucial was to understand the difference between the dignified parts of the Constitution and the efficient parts. The dignified excite and preserve the reverence of the population, he said, and the efficient parts are those by which it in fact works and rules. And just like England in 1865, the Falkland Islands today have a double set of institutions. The dignified ones to impress the many, as Bagehot would say, whilst the efficient ones govern the many.
The Constitution is the foundation stone of this organisation of government. It defines in overall terms the powers and obligations of the various arms of government.
The Commonwealth principles split the government into three active arms. The legislature, which makes the legislation or policy through ordinances. The executive, which carries out these policy decisions and is responsible for all departments of government. And the judiciary, which sanctions people if they break the law. Under these principles, commonly known as the Latimer House principles, each arm of the government should be independent.
On top of the foundation from the Constitution, you have a layer of ordinances, rules, orders, regulations, which more closely define the individual powers and responsibilities of each individual area of government.
The structure of the legislature, basically the Legislative Assembly, is set out in the Constitution. The number of constituencies, the number of members, and these things can only be changed through a referendum. The efficient secret, according to Bagehot, at the heart of it all was the close union and the nearly complete fusion of executive and legislative powers in the Cabinet. Here in the Falklands, that board of control, as Bagehot puts it, which rules the nation, could be viewed as the Executive Council.
The composition of the Executive Council is laid down in the Constitution. It also lays down that there are only 3 voting members of Executive Council, and these are the elected members drawn from the Legislative Assembly. So at the end of the day, they control not only the execution of policy, but also some of the development of policy within EXCO as well.
Under the Latimer House principles, you have the 3 arms of government. The legislature, the executive, and the third arm of the government is the judiciary.
The Constitution guarantees the independence of the judiciary. Everyone seems to take this very much for granted, that judges sit without political interference. Well, at least one hopes they do. And it's very true. Their independence is guaranteed by the Constitution.
All of these arms should be separate, but the executive and the legislature do tend to merge over certain things. The 3 MLAs who sit on both the Executive Council and the Legislative Assembly, for example. Going back to Walter Bagehot's thoughts, the monarchy, Bagehot said, acted as a disguise and strengthened the government through its combination of mystique and pageantry. Bagehot famously summed up the monarch's role as involving the right to be consulted, the right to encourage, and the right to warn. Here in the Falklands, that role is taken up by His Excellency the Governor. Why is it important for a country to have a constitution?
Constitutions define the authority, the patterns of how you create government. A constitution decides that there will be 8 members of the Legislative Assembly. It's the constitution that says how many constituencies there will be. It is those things that determine how you wish to be governed and the values by which you wish to be governed. The Constitution of the Falkland Islands 2008 has within it the provisions for individual human rights. They are extremely powerful. They are the things that guarantee you those things as a citizen of this country that you would hope to be protected by.
Normally, the governor is responsible to make sure that the Falkland Islands, although they're internally self-governing, they don't create any moves which will cause a contingent liability to Britain, something which will cost Britain. That's what he's really there for, and that's when he does step in if there's a contingent liability.
There are very definite roles on how the governor acts. Normally the governor follows the advice of the Executive Council, except in foreign affairs or in the interests of good governance. In the 2009 Constitution, if the governor decided not to agree with EXCO, then he'd have to explain it to the MLAs and the Secretary of State his reasons.
Well, he has to refer it to the Secretary of State, but he has to explain his reasons in writing for whatever he does. It's just underpinning more our right to, well, our self-governing status, which wasn't there in the previous constitution.
The Constitution of the Falkland Islands reflects a territory which has come a long way since the first Legislative Council was formed in 1843, composed of members nominated by the Crown. Prior to 1985, there wasn't a constitution as such in the modern form we would know. In the years before 1985, there were letters patent giving instructions to governors and a document called Colonial Regulations. These colonial regulations can still be seen in action today. When a bill is sent to the governor for his assent, it's delivered complete with a report from the Attorney General and all bound up in pink ribbon. In 1977, there was the first elected majority on Legislative Council. 6 members were elected, 1 for East Stanley, 1 for West Stanley, 1 for all Stanley, 1 for East Falkland, 1 for West Falkland and 1 for all Camp. In 1985, LegCo moved to 8 elected members, 4 from Camp and 4 from Stanley. It was in 1997 where amendments were made, the first being to replace the governor as president of the Legislative Council with an elected speaker. The number of Camp representatives reduced to 3 and Stanley increased to 5, which reflected the population movement in the islands.
It's a very complicated document, the Constitution. It's not something you can just change overnight. And I would like to stress here, I'm not an expert on the Constitution, but however, I was involved with the final Constitution which came out in 2009. Can't say I agreed with everything in it, but you know, it was agreed by the Foreign Office. We went through huge discussions and everything else about every single item. It took a long time.
All constitutions really need to be updated on a regular basis. I can't remember when one was done previously, but 10 years ago in 2008, we decided it was time that it was pretty outdated. So we decided it was time to make some alterations and just update it basically. It was a fairly slow process. It took a couple of years, I think, because there were some things that well, I don't say controversial, but everything that's in the Constitution has to be agreed, not only by us, of course, but has to be agreed by the UK because it was an overseas territory. So it was pretty much really just an updating a process to get it more modern.
It was on the 1st of January 2009 when the current Constitution came into force, replacing the 1985 version. The new Constitution modernised sections on fundamental rights, as well as embedding self-determination into the main body of the Constitution. It created the Legislative Assembly rather than the previous council and defined the role of the governor on domestic policies.
Every constitution is different. Each of the United Kingdom's overseas territories has one. There are certain components which are common to it through those various constitutions. One of them is that there is a relationship with the United Kingdom, which is the sovereign power. But constitutions have effectively been developed to suit the local needs. So, for example, that the members of the Legislative Assembly are in a Legislative Assembly is a Falkland Islands feature of their constitution. They are called different things in different territories. There are a number of different aspects to that, but I suppose the key thing to say is The United Kingdom's approach with each of its territories has been to negotiate with the elected representatives an accommodation in the Constitution which meets the needs of the people of that territory.
There were other additions too, including the appointment of a complaints commissioner who can look into any complaint raised by the public, although that complaint has to be channeled through an MLA. The other addition was to establish a public accounts committee.
Again, an important role in holding government to account. They're also governed by an ordinance, and there are constraints on what they can look at. They can only look at the past. They have no powers to look at policy.
Right at the back of the Constitution, in Annex B, you'll find the oaths and affirmations used for allegiance and due execution of office.
I, James Thomas Lewis, Queen's Counsel, do swear that I shall well and truly serve Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, in the office of Chief Justice, and will do right to all manner of people according to the Constitution.
Privileges and rights established to the people here under our Constitution.
And will do right to all manner of people according to the Constitution.
I will obey its laws and fulfil my duties and obligations under its Constitution.
Under its Constitution. According to the Constitution.
According to the Constitution.
According to the Constitution.
The importance of the Constitution is underlined in almost every appointment that is made within our society, every public appointment, because there is an oath that has to be taken or an affirmation made that the individual will uphold the Constitution and the laws of the Falkland Islands. This covers everything from, well, the governor right the way through to all of the senior members of government. The judiciary have their own oath, but basically is the same and requires compliance with the Constitution, and the Constitution will be upheld, and the laws of, obviously, the laws of the Falkland Islands will be upheld. Right the way through to our newest members of society, the people that are granted Falkland Islands status. They also swear that they will abide by and uphold the Constitution and laws of the Falkland Islands.
I think it is really important for everyone to have at least a level of understanding and just understand that there are these basic protections there, protection from discrimination, etc. So whilst reading the document line by line in detail is probably not everybody's cup of tea, it's not necessarily very easy to understand for everyone. But I think everyone should have some level of understanding of it, and I think, you know, even skimming through, you can see, even from the headings, what sort of rights and what the sorts of issues are, and then people could focus in on the bits that are of most interest or most relevant to their circumstance.
Is it something that is going to evolve over time, or is it static, or do we look at it and keep it moving? And maybe some people have suggested perhaps it's about time it was not rewritten, but certainly amended quite a bit.
Constitutions can be amended, and as you say, the last time the Falkland Islands Constitution was amended was in 2008. It's whether or not the people of that territory believe that the time has come to move the Constitution forward. The last amendment was basically designed to increase the amount of local government, self-governance of the Falkland Islands by the Legislative Assembly. If there is a belief that that needs to be moved further along, and there is popular assent to that being moved in the direction of travel that may be proposed, then Her Majesty's Government will be prepared to negotiate with the members of the Legislative Assembly. It has been practice for the United Kingdom to ensure that there is popular consent, and some vehicle needs to be found to provide that guarantee. But essentially, yes, it's for the territory to bring forward its proposals.
In November 2019, there'll be a referendum to see if people want to see a change which will affect the Constitution, that of a single constituency. The one bit of the Constitution which can be amended here in the Falklands without needing UK approval. So how do you go about drafting a constitution?
Well, I think everything starts before the drafting. So the very first thing is you have to think about what it is you want to include. So that's the important bit is the preparation for the drafting. And then we've got a team of legislative drafters here, and what they then have to do is take that those ideas and put them into straightforward, clear, unambiguous language that's going to stand the test of time. So the very starting point is the discussion and the conversation about what it is you want to include.
It's generally agreed that the Constitution should be a living document and reflect the times. It shouldn't be too easy to change, yet it shouldn't be too difficult either. Public law scholar John Griffiths in the 70s said that the Constitution is what happens. Even 6 years after his book was published, Bagehot wrote the introduction to the second edition about the troubles with sketching a living constitution. The difficulty is, he said, it's in constant change.